You think to yourself, okay, this is going to be pretty straightforward. At the end of the year, you're looking and you're going, man, I'm just not making the money I thought I would make. Each generation, the number of people getting into the industry because of a pre-existing interest was precipitously dropping.
Since 1998, Jamie Irvine has worked every level of heavy-duty parts, manufacturing, distribution, and service, selling millions along the way. He's a consultant, fractional director, keynote speaker, and host of the Heavy Duty Parts Report podcast.
One of the reasons why I think a lot of the people buying the parts lead with price is because there is no differentiator other than the price. Being a great parts person is all about being able to find the answer, not knowing the answer.
In closing, if there's one takeaway for shop owners out there they could take away from this conversation, what would it be?
Success in this business is heavily influenced by
Welcome to Diesel Stories, where we sit down with experts from across the industry. Today's guest, Jamie Irvine. And your background, Jamie, is mostly in heavy-duty parts, but I understand that you have heavy-duty consulting group as well. Welcome on the show.
Thank you very much for having me back on the show. I was really looking forward to having this discussion with you and talking about this great industry that we're part of.
And myself, I'll introduce myself. I'm Peter Cooper. I'm with the Sun Consulting. And what I do is help produce podcasts like this for Fullbay, but I also have a consulting company. I've been in the industry for 26 years, and I help shops try to increase their efficiency. And so, Jamie, I want to ask a couple questions for you. I mean, you're really an expert on parts. Of course, you do a heavy-duty podcast on parts. Where do you see parts right now, and how are tariffs affecting the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I think the tariff situation created a lot of complexity and increase the price of parts for everyone. And one of the things that I've seen is the frustration at the shop level of like, what is my cost going to be today? And then what is it going to be tomorrow? And so even if you're quoting on large, jobs, let's say you're going to do a big engine job, or you've got a retrofit that you're going to do some upfitting. What is my cost actually going to be? It's very hard to quote when you don't know what your costs are going to be. From the supplier's perspective and the distributors, they are trying to keep up. I think the fastest growing departments in all of these companies are the people responsible for trying to figure out these tariffs. It's been challenging for the entire industry. It's kind of the last thing our industry needed as well. We've already had the COVID lockdowns, the supply chain collapse, a prolonged freight recession. Our industry's been through a lot. So the tariffs have made the part side of the business much more complex than it already was.
And do you see that affecting supply at all? I mean, has it slowed down the supply of parts?
No, I don't really think that that's affected supply. I just think that it's created complexity, it's created added cost, and that cost gets passed along. So it gets passed along ultimately to the operators of the heavy equipment, and then they pass that cost on to whoever they're hauling freight for. So really at the end of the day, the price is paid by everyday people, both American and Canadian citizens. At the end of the day, that's who ends up paying for these tariffs. I do think, though, in all fairness to the impact of the tariffs, there are some, like, let's say, American-based companies that I've talked to that are on the manufacturing side that have greatly benefited from the tariffs, where people have started shifting away from offshore product to either nearshore or onshore. This was a remanufacturer that I'm thinking of turbos, but they're also a manufacturer of a unique style of turbo, and they've seen their business go up exponentially because, hey, let's face it, now that the tariffs are there is an incentive to buy local. And really on both sides of the border, we've seen that occur. I think America benefits from it more than Canadian companies because there's just less Canadian manufacturing that is available and a lot more American manufacturing that can benefit. But really at the end of the day, those tariffs have influenced purchasing decisions away from international suppliers towards local suppliers. Of course, that's not across the board. That's only when available. When it's not available, you just end up buying it and paying the price.
Well, and I was kind of wondering that, I was thinking in my head about back when I owned a shop and I was buying parts and we were comparing prices of like US made, like a gunite drum versus a Chinese import drum. Are you seeing that because of the tariffs that that's made those import parts much less competitive? And is that why you think the market's shifting?
Well, of course, it has raised the price of the internationally sourced products, depending on the country, of course, especially out of China. But the problem is that if there isn't a competitive American option, you just pay the price, right? So is it leveling the playing field to some degree for the American manufacturing base? Absolutely. But again, that's a very product dependent kind of scenario and situation, and you have to look at it by product category. It's not something that you could categorically say across the board this has improved every vertical within the manufacturing sector that takes care of the trucking industry.
Yeah, and it seems like at least I was just at TMC and I've talked to a lot of shop owners. From the shop owner standpoint, which is who I deal with a lot, they don't seem to really be affected by it much. It sounds like it's probably affecting the suppliers more than the end user.
Well, I mean, it affects the people who are distributing the product, the people who are manufacturing the product. It has a direct impact on them. For example, if you're a distributor and now you're bringing in this product at 25 or 50% greater cost than previously, you perhaps are scrambling. It may be changing your supply chain. The end user is absolutely affected. The repair shop might actually benefit because they pass the expense along to the end user, the fleet operator, but they're the ones that have to pay that higher price. So I think at either end of the supply chain, that's where the people are feeling it the most, whether it's the manufacturing supplier or it is the end user fleet. The distributors have added complexity and they have to pass those costs on to the repair shops, and the repair shops pass it on to the fleets. The fleets have to absorb it. And what are they going to do? They're going to pass it on to whoever they're hauling freight for. And guess what? It just keeps going. So, absolutely, the end user, the ultimate end user, is the one who pays this price.
Paying the price. So, with this added layer of complexity you're talking about, and I would assume it's changed the logic a lot of these suppliers. Is it adding increased cost to them? I mean, do they have a higher input cost now to acquire these parts than they did before? Or is this just a natural shift that happens all the time?
Well, yeah, I mean, the tariffs directly affect the price of the actual part, but I think it also affects the actual operating costs of these companies because there's a lot more to manage. It's been so dynamic for so long. I think it's kind of calmed down now, but certainly the first few months, once the new administration came in and started making these changes, they were very dynamic times. And I know for a fact that operating costs were raised because they just had to have more people involved to try to manage it. So that was driving up operational costs as well, along with the obvious increase in prices on specific parts if it now had a tariff.
You made the point about operating costs, and I kind of wanted to pick your brain for a second. And this is more from a shop level. How does this parts department in a shop environment, not necessarily someone that's selling parts retail, but they're selling parts to be able to fix trucks. How do they really evaluate their parts department and understand what all their input costs are to try to be profitable?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, if you're thinking of a repair shop that is running minimal inventory, they're basically using their local distributors and dealerships as satellite warehouses. They're buying as needed. They're putting those parts on the floor for the individual bays and technicians to complete repairs. That's a pretty complex business. And then if you add any kind of out the door sales or over the counter sales to that, it really becomes complex relatively quickly. And I think there's been kind of this idea that the parts business is simple, right? You buy it, you stock it, you resell it. Like, how hard could it be? It's a much more complex business than people understand. And I think they start running into issues with inventory, with how much cash that they've spent on inventory, how they manage that, how they use technology to account for everything and to keep track. Then there's the price matrix of like, how do you price this stuff and how do you remain competitive but also be profitable? There's so many of those things that have to be evaluated. And, if you have not had a background in that part of the business, there can be a lot of blind spots that create a situation where you think to yourself, okay, this was going to be pretty straightforward. At the end of the year, you're looking and you're going, man, I'm just not making the money I thought I would make on all of this time and effort and energy and resources that I've invested now in my parts department.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I work with a lot of shop owners to really get them to understand is that for a lot of these general repair shops, half of their total revenue comes from part sales, give or take. It's about a 50-50 mix, is pretty safe to say. And yet they ignore the entire thing. And what I try to get them to see is like, look, to do $5 million in revenue, say you got a shop's doing $5 million in revenue. To do $2.5 million in part sales, you usually only need one parts guy. But to do that in labor sales, you need 6, 7 technicians. And it's like, look, guys, parts is a lot bigger part of your business than you think, and you're not treating it like a profit center. What tips would you have for independent shop owners looking at their parts department?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And it really is the scalability of the parts side of the business. And I think that if you're going to take a serious look at that, I think you have to look at it in a couple different ways. One, how are we going to handle the internal purchase and use of parts, and how are we going to make money off of that? And then, is there an opportunity for us to scale the parts department beyond just internal use and start supplying our customers with parts that they need? Because, most, like, not too many fleets out there do zero maintenance on their own, right? Like some do, but there's a lot of shops that have their own equipment. They do some maintenance at their own shops, and then the hard stuff they take to your repair shop, right? So there's an opportunity there, but the complexity of it, the cost, the investment, and the potential scalability of it all has to be factored correctly. And I think it comes down to an investment in the right people, because you have to have a baseline of understanding and knowledge of how to operate the parts department. And if you don't have a good parts person, they can cost you so much money. So you've got to have the right people in place. You have to have the right systems, and systems can be broken into kind of analog, step-by-step procedures, standard operating procedures, and then the digital side, right? Which then, of course, someone like Fullbay becomes a player in really allowing you to move and account for these parts in a profitable way. So I just think that it's one of those things where if you aren't going to go all in on all of that, you're definitely going to be leaving money on the table in a best case scenario, and you might be actually hurting your business in a worst case scenario.
Well, and I remember one of your podcasts, you made a figure, and you'd basically, and you're going to have to remind me what the number is, but you had said that if you're not making at least X margin on parts, you're actually losing money. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so that was in reference to out the door parts. So if I'm selling out the door to people and I have to deliver that part, if I'm not making 20% margin on that sale, I'm losing money. And because after I account for all of the costs to deliver the product, it's just not, you're not making money. Now, there might be reasons for you to sell at 20% or even below that on certain like commodity things. And there's also things that you have to take into account when it comes to rebates and what you make on the back end of that deal. So again, this is a lot more complex business than people think. But yeah, definitely, just on a straight sale out the door that I have to deliver, rule of thumb, 20% is break even.
And what's crazy is you talk to a lot of these shop owners, and I know it's a little bit different dynamic, but let's face it, you have money involved in having parts, your inventory, but staffing. I mean, even if you don't have a dedicated parts person, you have a service advisor that's doing parts, and God forbid, please tell me these shops aren't using techs, although I know they do. But that has a cost to it. I mean, you have to pay that person a salary, and let's face it, the parts department cripples most of these shops and they never see it. Like I walk into shops every day. I'm in shops every other week. And I'll literally go and interview the technician and say, what is the number one thing stopping you from getting it done? And they'll say, parts.
Waiting
I
on
never
parts.
have what I need when I need it.
Yep.
Of course, to be honest, some of that could be put on technicians because most of them are pretty bad about, giving me a complete list of what parts they need up front. But generally speaking, there's a lot more cost goes into parts than people give credit to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a very visual person. I think in pictures. So when I think about inventory, I don't think about boxes and skids of product. I think of stacks of cash on my shelf. When I think about employees, I think about cash burn rate. Because let's face it, the larger the organization is and the more people you employ, the less you get out of the base of your employees. And there's some really good information out there. It's something like the square root of number of employees produces something like over 50% of the results of your company. So if you have 10 employees, 3 of them are producing over 50% of the total your business is generating.
Yeah.
The other 7, these are not necessarily people who are contributing to revenue. They're actually burning cash. So in your scenario, in an ideal world, we have a very good technician that is extremely good at diagnosing problems. You have a service writer who is very good at communicating to the customer the implications of either approving or disapproving a quote on a repair. And you have a parts person who has the ability to look at the repair that's being suggested and to say, yeah, but you also need to think about parts 5, 6, and 7 in this diagram, because those are likely to fail next, right? So when you get all 3 of those people working together, those are probably the 3 people out of the 10 that are generating all the income for you in your business. And that whole idea of the square root of your employees producing over 50% of the results, it gets exponentially worse the larger the company gets. Do the math on it. Go to 100 employees. Go to 1,000 employees. It's shocking what ends up happening. It's really scary. So, if you're a small shop, you already know who your star players are, and you've got to, to me as a business owner, you have to invest in the right people and give them the resources that they need to succeed, and then get the heck out of their way.
Yeah, and I'm a really big believer too that if you look at a lot of organizations, the number I use is a little different, or kind of a saying, and that's that 20% of your people are doing 80% of the work.
Pareto principle, sure.
Yeah, and when you think about it, though, whatever the number really is, really what the takeaway for me has always been: buy or pay for the most expensive employee you can hire, as long as they're worth it. In other words, it was the same way I looked at a technician. I don't care if I pay a technician $200,000 a year, right? If the guy's making me 10x his salary, I don't care what I pay him. It's just an investment. And a lot of business owners think that they want to cheap out on parts people, especially because they look at it as a cost. And it's like, you have to look at what that person brings to the table. And then if you could truly evaluate what they do and put a number on it, they're worth what they're worth. And it doesn't matter how much you pay them. It's irrelevant. And I see it though. Sometimes you get these bigger companies come in, a shop sells to private equity, and they completely line item a person. And then it's like, you just lost a guy with 40 years of experience. Like, I know from personal experience walking into a parts store, I would wait in line for the guy there used to be this guy at my parts store. His name was Kenny. But you could walk in the door and that man knew what brake shoe you had before you ever made it to the counter. And I would purposely wait in line for that guy because my time was valuable, and I hated having to go back to the parts store for a guy who didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, that is so true. And I saw that play out in all the parts departments that I worked in. There was always a Kenny or a Hank or a John that was everybody's favorite. And that older gentleman ran off his feet all day long. And, as a young up and coming parts person, I think the thing that benefited me was I had a mentor who I would run to him and say, what is this? And he would take the time and he would say, do you want me to tell you the part number, or do you want me to show you how to look it up? And I always said, show me how to look it up. So it took a little longer to train me, but I very quickly was able to become useful to my customers and become one of those trusted people. But like the reality is, it takes, in my opinion, it takes a minimum of 2 years to train a parts person until they basically get to a place where they're useful at all. It gets a long training curve, right? So it's not, we can't just flip a switch and throw some people in and make it happen. So the parts department is going to continue to be a place where this tribal knowledge that we're losing as the demographics of our entire society go over that cliff, it's going to get more challenging, not less challenging, as time goes on.
Well, and it's crazy too, because, I grew up in the days I mean, we had the internet, but we were still using a lot of paper books and
Yeah.
picture books. Like, I can still remember flipping through giant catalogs looking for a switch, by what it looks like, and it's like, I think we've lost some of that. I'm pretty sure that if I took an R14 valve into a parts store
Yep.
and put it on the counter, they could not tell the difference between an R14 and an R12. They wouldn't have a clue what they're looking at, and I really truly think we've lost that. I mean, I see it today anymore. I called a parts store the other day for a battery for my tractor, and they're like, "What's it in?"
Yeah,
It doesn't matter. Just give me a 31 top post. Well,
exactly.
what's it fit? I'm like, it fits an Alice Chalmers. I'm like, but you're going to give me the wrong battery because I've converted it to a top stud. Like, just give me the part. Like, you understand what I'm getting at. But I
Yeah.
think we've really lost some of that. People don't see it as a craft anymore.
We have lost it, and I think one of the things, and I hadn't even thought about this until I was at Aftermarket Dialogue at HDAW this year in Texas, and I heard someone talk about how the younger generation, because they're digital natives and they grew up in a world where the internet is there was no need to memorize anything. Whereas the way we grew up, you had to memorize phone numbers, you had to memorize part numbers. And I thought, oh my goodness, that in some ways explains why there seems to be a stalling of the development of parts people. And they're so reliant on, they never learned how to memorize anything. So they're always looking it up. And I had never considered that as being part of the challenge with the last two generations of parts people, but there it is.
Agree. I mean, technology has been great. Let's face it.
Yeah.
Anymore, you can take your phone and it'll scan and it'll search the internet for an image. But honestly, it gets it wrong as much as it gets it right. At least for me, it does. Like, if I have an obscure part, I'm like, well, let's see what it shows. It's very rarely accurate. Like, it's crazy how often it doesn't help.
Yeah, and I don't think we've done a good job, and I say we as the larger sense of society. I don't think we've done a great job of really teaching people any kind of like critical thinking skills. And that's where like you really need that to be able to be a good parts person. Because, for example, you have to, this is the second time in 3 weeks I've had a customer order a DPF. Like, I bet you there's an upstream issue that we need to look at. So you can, I worked with techs all the time when I was in parts and say, hey man, can you just do me a favor? Go check the turbo, like go do a leak test, right? Like, let's see if there's any blow by. And we would identify upstream, downstream issues that were causing a parts failure. I don't see a lot of people really good at that. And I don't think we're good at teaching it. I don't think people are naturally good at it, right? So it is a skill set that has to be developed. And it's not really like, I'm not really just saying like, oh, the younger generation can't do that. I don't think we were ever good at developing those skills. I got lucky. I had two amazing mentors that really helped me. And I kind of have a natural analytical view of things. And I was also a real big people person. So that worked in my favor. But even for me, it took a long time to develop that skill set. And also, if you don't stay up on it and you don't keep developing it, technology in vehicles is changing at such a rapid rate that I think it's becoming even more important than ever before. And we're probably weakest at this point than we've ever been before.
We have, and you see it too, the reliance on technology. It would always, I don't know why, but for some reason it seemed like Freightliner's parts system goes down. And when it goes down worldwide. And they can't look anything up. And it's because they don't have an ability, like what you're saying, to identify parts. I mean, I see it the other day. I go into the parts store to get an O-ring, and they can't find me an O-ring by size. I'm like, it's just a -10 O-ring for, well, we have to look it up in the parts catalog. And I'm like, I get you should do that, but there is another way to do this, guys. You can find a part like a bolt by size.
Yeah. Yeah. And demographics, I mean, are a massive influence on all of this because the reality is when I started in the parts business almost 30 years ago, I had the benefit of these great mentors, but there was like four of them on the counter and I was like the one new kid, right? So I had four people teaching me. It was awesome. I feel bad for people today because all those four guys are retired. There's only one or two my age. And there's, statistically, there's like 0.25 of the younger generation for every parts counter. So if you get one young kid who's really keen and trying to learn, I mean, the people who are supposed to be teaching that young person are run off their feet because there's not enough people who know what they're doing, right? So every day the phones are ringing, they're texting, they're emailing. There's lineups at the parts counter. It's a tough situation for sure. And technology will be part of the solution, but we also run a major risk. And that's why, as an American, if you haven't talked to your congressman about right to repair, go to the MEMA.org website and put in your letter to your congressman, to your representative, because they don't understand how important things like right to repair are for the trucking industry. People just in general, if you're not in the industry, don't have that appreciation. Like, we have a real risk with the consolidation of data and information into just a few silos, and that would be detrimental to the whole trucking industry. So regardless of where you stand politically, it's not really a political issue at all. It's more of an economic issue. It's a societal issue because the trucking industry supports all of society. So, I think of those things and those issues, and you might be listening to this and going, as a repair shop owner, like, does that really affect me? And the answer is yes, it absolutely does. If you work in this industry, it affects you. Even if you don't work in this industry, it affects you because the trucking industry is the backbone of society.
Well, and we've already seen it. So if a shop owner doesn't think it really matters to them, ask any shop owner how easy it is to work on a pack car engine.
Yeah.
Can you get the software? How long does it take to buy the software? And if you can even get the software, if they'll even call you back because you have to buy it from corporate, the next question is can you get any repair information? And if anybody wants to put that into perspective, just think about that. There's a reason why it's so hard to fix those engines. They're trying to do everything they can to keep the aftermarket away from them.
Yeah.
But we're even seeing it in the heavy duty world. Go to your local Freightliner dealer and ask for an input shaft for a D12 auto shift transmission. You can't buy a single part for that transmission. If anything goes wrong on that transmission, you're buying a whole transmission. And it's not good for any of us because now customers can't afford to fix it. I mean, a simple clutch job now just turned into a $22,000 or $23,000 job because you got to replace the transmission just because the input shaft's dinged up.
No, absolutely. It's a real risk to all of us, and it's an important issue, and it has a big impact on the parts department as well. So, the future is anything but crystal clear right now. It seems like where we're headed, there's so many challenges and issues. Yeah, it's a different time, that's for sure.
How are you seeing, is there much volatility in the market of parts people jumping ship? I know right now there's a lot of talk about technicians. I mean, the average tech's only staying 2 years. Do you have any information on what's going on in the industry from that perspective?
You mean like we're losing technicians? Are we to other industries? Are we losing parts people to other industries?
Well, yeah. Are we losing parts people? And what's the average tenure? I mean, from what I've seen, it's younger and younger guys at the parts stores, and nobody seems to be staying in the industry.
Yeah, the turnover rate, I think, has dramatically gone up. And I did a small study on how generationally people got into the industry. Baby boomers typically got into the industry because they were building hot rods in the 60s and 70s, and then they had babies and they needed to make more money. So they were working in the automotive side, and all of a sudden now they have a wife and they have children and they need to make more money. So they moved over to heavy duty so they could make a better wage. By the time the Gen Xers came along, the cars were crap. Like, we're talking like late 70s, 80s, right? Like, these are not like a different time. And also the rise of technology was there, but there was, but when we were in our early 20s, there was like the boom of the choppers, and there was the Fast and the Furious movies and stuff. So there was still this automotive connection. And what I found as I did the study was each generation, the number of people getting into the industry because of a pre-existing interest that was connected somehow to the industry was precipitously dropping. And it was relying more and more on family connection. And then it got to a point where you get to like Gen Z, which is like my daughter's generation, and the interests had all but completely moved away from anything automotive related and was all technology. And so my nephews and my daughter, all they wanted to do was become a YouTube influencer.
Yeah.
And so it was just so interesting as I tracked all of that, because the tenure of the boomers was extremely long, multi-decade. The tenures of the Gen Xers was a little less, but still quite long. Millennials, it got smaller. And by the time you get to Gen Z, we're talking like rapid turnover in and out. Like a lot of times people are there for a very short period of time. So I only have anecdotal, evidence or information that I've collected by what I've viewed in that little study that I did. But I would say that if you did a proper study on that, I think what you would find is that the turnover rate is going much higher. Also, I think that has in some ways, is that really more to do with generational change, or is it also to do with the way our corporate environments have changed? Because tenure with companies in general has dropped to very low levels. I mean, people just have no expectation that the company they start with is the company they're going to retire with, right? So I think that there's a lot of influences there, but yeah, it is. What I notice is that the older people that I was connected with in my network, they retire out. The younger people, I'll be connected with them on LinkedIn. I'll have met them at a trade show. A year later, I look and they're not in our industry anymore. So anecdotally, I think that has accelerated a lot. And part of it's got to be, we got to look at ourselves, right? Are we creating an industry and an environment that retains people? Or are we running some old ways of operating that are driving the newer generations out who, arguably speaking, they've had more opportunity and more ability and mobility to move within industries than we ever did when we were young because of the advancement of our digital technology.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point, and that is that a couple things. Number one, the human interest has changed. And we'll just use an example of that. I know that both of us are motorcycle riders. I've seen some of your posts. You ride motorcycles. The number of people that ride motorcycles today is like 20% of what it was 10 years ago. No young people are coming into it. It just doesn't interest them. And I think us in this industry have to understand that if we cannot make this industry appealing to the younger people, if we keep doing what we've always done, it's not going to work. They do not want to come work in this industry. They do not want to come work in an abusive environment. They don't want to come work in a dimly dirty environment. Like, I get that some of this industry is dirty, but we make it worse on ourselves. Like, we don't have to make this environment so unwelcoming. Like, it's crazy. And I know that a lot of the old timers, at least, so I grew up and went through a true apprenticeship. Like, when I started at 18 years old in the shop, I was working with guys that had been there 40 years, and they were rough and they were tough and they were not welcoming. But if you act like that today, that guy's just going to go somewhere else. And it doesn't just necessarily mean he's going to go to another parts supplier or another shop. He's just going to go to another industry.
Yeah. And the Wall Street Journal a few years ago published an article, and they talked about the tool belt generation, referring to the Gen Z. And they were talking about the dramatic drop in enrollment in four-year degree university type post-secondary education, and the dramatic increase in the enrollment in the trades. And that was good news. At least on the surface, it looked like that would be good news for us. And it hasn't translated into that. And I think it's because we're losing to the welding industry, the HVAC industry, the plumbing industry, the electrical industry. Like, we're losing to the other trades who are offering a more, I guess, enticing opportunity for these young people who have decided to kind of swing hard back towards the trades after 30 plus years of us really moving away from the trades. And why is that? Well, one of the things I keep hearing is the cost of tools, right? The barriers to entry into our industry are higher. And so therefore, these other industries are winning, but also the environment and the culture and the way that people are treated. I mean, that all plays a role. And the parts world kind of gets lost in that discussion because we're really hyper-focused on technicians. But I think that the parts technicians, it's a nicer environment. It should be an easier sell. Like, it's high wages. It's a better environment than a shop from at least the perspective of you're not out in the elements working. You're not in a cold shop. Usually you're in an inside, indoors. The hours aren't that bad. Normally you're working Monday to Friday, maybe a little bit on Saturday. I think it should be easier for us to attract parts people, but it's like the parts world is just like not even on the radar when we have that discussion.
Yeah, it's not. I've said this for years. We need to bring the sexy back to this industry. It's the same way with technicians. I mean, yes, we have more people entering, but we also, the attrition rate is almost, 40 something % of people won't be here next year. at least new guys. So I think we need to look at that. But ultimately, I think for me, one of the takeaways I've seen in this industry is it's pay. People aren't coming into the industry because they can go put the same effort in and be a plumber and make 80 grand the first year out of high school and not have a degree. Whereas a mechanic, you're right, the barrier to entry is massive. I mean, I know how big my toolbox is, and I know that how much money I've got wrapped up into it. I mean, I think that in this industry, we really have to look at why can't we attract people, and I think a lot of it's pay. And you have to ask yourself, why can we not afford to pay these people a going wage? And it's because so many of these shops are so poorly run and they don't understand. Why is it that only 60% of shops offer benefits? Like, that's a crazy thing. And it's different regionally because there's different parts of the U.S., like California, for example, that it's mandated that you have to have health insurance. But if you've got a technician in nowhere in Nebraska and he could go work at the gas station or he could come work at your shop, I don't know that a lot of these guys, it's not a hard choice. I mean, a perfect example of this. When I sold my shop, my son worked for the shop. He went in there after school, cleaned the bathrooms, put away stock orders. He did a little bit of parts. And he went to him and asked for a raise, and they said, "We can't afford to pay you." He said, "Well, that's fine. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go down the street and make $6 an hour more making pizzas at the gas station." And that right there, that is why we're losing people out of this industry.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be that way because, I mean, if you are running things correctly, the margins are there. Like, if you're in your parts department, if you're running 35% out the door, 50 to 60%, internal on the parts, if your margins on what you're charging for labor rates and everything are there, if you're running a systematic, well-run business, the margins are there to pay your people. And not to mention, if you run that kind of business and you focus on building that kind of business, your volume is improved because there are a lot of poorly run competitors and you can take advantage of that. It's the greatest opportunity for the business owner. Get better people, pay them well, build a better business. You're going to make more money. To me, it's a no-brainer, but not that it's easy to do. Don't mistake me. We can talk about it in those terms very rapidly. This is a challenging thing to build, but it's worth the effort. It's worth the time and the resources because the output can be extremely good for the employees, but also for the owner.
Well, and that's one of the things I try to tell shop owners when I talk to them. It's like, look, however you do it, the money is there if you do it right. Private equity, but would not be in this massive consolidation swing in this industry if the money wasn't there. Like they've taken up some industries and we know which ones they've done. I mean, they've pretty much bought every HVAC company there is in the United States. As a matter of fact, if you go to any major metropolitan area, I guarantee you 80% of the HVAC companies are owned by private equity. Right. There's a reason why they're going after this industry. It is very profitable when it's done correctly. Yeah. And the other thing of that, and it's a very good point you said, shops do not have to do that good to be better than their competitors. And that's the same way with parts, especially independent parts locations. It's not that hard to be better than the big multi-billion-dollar companies that are out there. It doesn't take, let's face it, not to be mean, but it doesn't take much to beat Napa when it comes to customer service.
Can I tell you a story about that?
Go, yeah.
So you talked about private equity and you talked about the big players. I want to tell you a funny story about that. I won't say any names to protect the guilty, but I had a relatively decent regional sized parts distribution company say to me one time that they loved it when one of the big consolidators bought one of their competitors, because within 6 months, all the best people at those local branches quit and came to work for them. So you're absolutely right. Like the bar in some areas of this business is pretty low, and you just have to do a few good things consistently well, and you can run circles around these large consolidators.
Well, and I think that this is a valuable lesson and I'll hopefully bear with me and go through this exercise. As from my perspective as a shop owner, I can tell you the name of all the best parts people I ever dealt with. And you know what made them great, Jamie? It wasn't that they got me the part the cheapest they could, is that they were reliable. If I had a parts guy that said that part was going to be there tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., he made it happen. And that's what made him a great parts person. They were reliable and they got things done. And price was never even part of the thing. Like, let's face it, fleets out there, if you give them two options and say, you can have part XYZ today and it's going to cost you this, or we can save 10% and you have to wait a week to get it, I think we all know what they're going to do. But yet we
Yeah.
always try to make it about price, and it's not. And it's that way in the parts world. I would much rather buy from a vendor that's reliable, that I can trust, that's going to show up, and that, even if they're more expensive. And I used to tell my vendors that too. I'm not going to beat you up on price as much as you think I am, but I am going to make you honor your word. And if you tell me you're going to be there at 8:00 with that part, it needs to be there at 8:00.
Yeah, I think that is the whole connection between price of parts and cost of downtime. It's one of the things that is talked about so much, right? Everybody uses the uptime slogan. And yet I still find it to be one of the most misunderstood things at the front line, on the counter, in the shop. It's like people get, because the customers often do lead with price. And I think this is the thing. One of the reasons why I think a lot of the people buying the parts lead with price and ask for better pricing is because they have kind of observed that the service level is basically the same. So there is no other differentiator other than the price. But therein lies the great opportunity. If all of a sudden you start to elevate the service side of your business, I don't just mean services and repair, I mean just overall what you provide the people buying from you. If you start to elevate, then all of a sudden price on parts especially starts to fall off pretty quickly. Maybe if you rank order the top 1, 2, 3 objections you get from customers, all of a sudden price gets down to like number 3 pretty darn quick.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the tips that I teach shop owners is, you know what? Stop making it about price. They're only talking about price because that's what you're talking about. If you just go to a customer and say, it's this much to change your water pump, I'll have it done tomorrow morning, you could sell the job a lot easier than if you go to them and you itemize everything and you list it all out and you show them the part. And then you're like, well, I don't know when I'm going to have it done.
Yeah.
And that's really what differentiates a lot of these operations. And it's the same way with parts. I mean, and this is a crazy story, but we had a fleet that was hauling spinach, and they hauled dedicated routes from Sacramento to Toronto. And I didn't know at the time, but from the minute that you pluck that vegetable out of the ground, it only has so many days to hit the store shelf or it's not considered fresh produce.
Right.
Anyways, they blew a hub. It was a Canadian trailer. Nobody had the hub. It was air disc brakes when they first came out because the Canadians adopted them way before the US did. And everybody I called said, no, we can't get the part. We can't get the part. We can't get the part. And one supplier said, we can get the part, but it's going to be crazy expensive for freight. I said, I don't care. I'll pay it. $1,400 air freight, Saturday delivery. I don't care. I want the part. And that's the parts vendor that I've stuck with for years because I can rely on that person and they always gave me options.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, I mean, to me, being a great parts person is all about being able to find the answer, not knowing the answer. Like, you don't have to know everything. You just have to be really good at finding the answer quickly, getting back to your customers and being reliable.
So I wanted to bring up, you and I are both speaking at Diesel Connect
Yes.
later in Phoenix. And tell me a little bit about what you're going to talk about. My understanding is that you're going to do a deep dive into profit leaks. Can you give us maybe a little sneak preview of that?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on kind of things that we've been talking about today. I'm going to focus on people. I think that there is a huge cost that people don't account for when you fail to retain people. So that starts with recruitment. It goes through to how you deal with people and how well you can retain them, because there are costs there that nobody puts directly on a profit and loss statement, right? But they're there. They're there. They're hidden inside that P&L. They're not broken out as a separate line that you can look at, but they're there. I think that looking at your margins and what you're selling things for is a huge opportunity, and it's a lot of pain for a lot of shops that I talk to. They really struggle with their price matrices and how to get that right. We're going to talk about technology and how suffering with bad technology for a long time will cost you so much more. And I've seen so many companies kind of kick down the road that technology problem and say, yeah, the technology we're using is not really up to speed, but it's going to be hard to fix. So, or it's going to be time consuming, or it's going to be costly. It's like, no, you have no idea how much this is costing you in productivity and efficiency and profit. So those are three of the areas that we're going to focus on and talk a lot about in the presentation on leakage and shops. And then I've got a presentation also. It's actually a workshop that we're going to do. We're going to talk a lot about how to present your company to customers and how to talk about your company. I'm really excited about that one because people who attend that at Diesel Connect, that workshop, they're going to walk away with a new pitch deck that basically becomes the foundation of their entire communication strategy of their business and how they're going to fundamentally change the way they talk about and market and go to market with their business. It has widespread application in all kinds of aspects of your business. So those are two of the presentations I'm really excited about at Diesel Connect. I think people are going to be able to take away some real actionable things that they should be able to make some changes immediately and see some results. So that's exciting.
Well, Jamie, thanks for showing your insight today and sharing that with us. In closing, if there's one takeaway for shop owners out there they could take away from this conversation, what would it be?
Success in this business is heavily influenced by how well you execute on small things and make incremental improvements over time. I think people really don't appreciate how influential that can be in moving the needle for the success of your business. So if you're going to take away from anything, just focus on elevating the way that you go and take care of your customers. Focus on that, make small improvements over time, and I guarantee you that that's going to move the needle on the success of your business.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that. I absolutely agree with you. And I think that as business owners and entrepreneurs, which you and I both are, and a lot of people listening are, is that you're going to way underestimate what you can accomplish in 5 years, and you will way overestimate what you can accomplish in 5 days. And just remember that. What we truly need is small, measurable change. You don't want giant leaps. You don't want that tree to sway that far. And I think a lot of business owners need to just understand that if you just get a little bit every day, it adds up to a lot quickly. Well, thanks for being on with us today. Again, I'm Peter Cooper. Jamie, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me, and looking forward to the next one. We'll all see you at Diesel Connect.
See you there.
Thanks for tuning in to Diesel Stories. Be sure to follow the show on your favorite podcast platform and join us next time for more shop talk, insights, and stories from the diesel repair world.